Hello, this is David Neal, Northwest Coast native artist and storyteller, and this is the story of how Raven made the salmon. In the early days, there was no salmon in the rivers near Crooked Beach. Raven, who was known as the chief of the ancients, wanted salmon to come to the river. He went to visit his Aunt Starwoman, who was very wise. "Auntie, wouldn't it be wonderful if salmon came to our river?" Raven asked. "That would be lovely, nephew, but they have never visited our river," Starwoman replied. "There must be a way that we can make the salmon come to our river," Raven said. "You are old and wise, Auntie. Do you have any ideas?" Starwoman thought for a moment and replied, "Twins are known to have an affinity for salmon. You could try to find a twin." "Where would I find a twin?" Raven said. "Go to the graves and ask of our ancestors," Starwoman replied. "Find where a female twin is buried and take her for your wife." Raven left his aunt's house and went to the grave sites behind the village. At the first grave, Raven said, "Is there a twin here, graves on the ground?" The grave replied, "There is no twin here, but there is one back of us." Raven found another grave farther back and said, "Is there a twin here, graves on the ground?" "No, there's not here, but over by the rocks there's a twin," the grave said. He went to another grave, asked, "Is there a twin here, graves on the ground?" "There are no twins here. Try closer to the forest," the grave responded. So Raven went to the grave and asked for a fourth time, "Have you a twin here, graves on the ground?" One of the graves replied, "I'm a twin." At once Raven dug up the bones of the grave and laid them on the ground, making sure that the skeleton was complete. Then he sprinkled the water of life over the bones from head to feet. It wasn't long before muscles started to grow in the bones, then skin, then hair, and before long there was a pretty young woman lying on the ground. She opened her eyes and said, "Why do you waken me, chief?" "I made you come to life because I wish to make you my wife," Raven replied. "I will marry you, but you must treat me with respect," the woman said. "You will be my wife, and I will always treat you respectfully," Raven replied. "Then I will be your wife. My name is Salmon Maker," the woman said. "I am called Chief of the Ancients," Raven replied. "Let's go to our house, my dear." When they arrived at the house, his brothers, Canoe Caulking, Orphan, and Shameless the Deer were outside. "Brothers, this is my new wife, Salmon Maker," Raven announced proudly. Brothers smiled and welcomed her. Raven took his new wife inside to meet his sisters. His sisters welcomed Salmon Maker to her new home and laid out a generous meal. Later, when they were lying in bed, Raven said, "Tomorrow can you make salmon come to the river near our village?" "Oh, I can't make salmon come to the river," Salmon Maker replied. "But your name is Salmon Maker," Raven said. "But you are a twin, and they have close ties with salmon," Raven continued, when she didn't reply. But Salmon Maker was already asleep. The next day, Raven was still hopeful that his new wife would make the salmon come, so he took his brothers to the river, and they built a salmon weir. It took them all day, but by sunset they had a large, sturdy salmon weir. The next day, Raven went to check the weir at first light, but there was no salmon. In the following days, he checked it every morning, but there was no salmon in the weir. A few days later, Raven was out gathering wood, and Orphan, Canoe Caulking, and Shameless the Deer were at the house. The brothers complained about being hungry, so Salmon Maker asked Canoe Caulking to get a bucket of fresh water. He went to get the water and came back with a cedar box half full of water. Salmon Maker put a finger in her mouth and put it in the water for just a moment. Immediately, there was a large spring salmon jumping in the cedar box. "Shameless the Deer, please help your brother to cook salmon," Salmon Maker said. Shameless the Deer filleted the salmon, Canoe Caulking split some wood, and Orphan started a fire. Working together, the salmon was ready in no time. "Eat quickly now before Raven returns," Salmon Maker said. The three of them divided it up and quickly devoured the succulent spring salmon. "Throw all the bones in the fire and be careful to leave no scraps," Salmon Maker instructed. The three brothers were full and satiated when Raven returned carrying a large bundle of firewood. Raven looked around at the smiling faces and said, "Why do you look so satisfied and happy, my brothers?" "We're just pleased to see you, brother," Canoe Caulking replied. Raven was suspicious, but he was tired and decided not to pursue it. He sat down by his wife. "My dear, I checked the salmon weir again, but there's nothing," Raven said. "Can't you help me make salmon come to our river?" "I'd like to help you, but I can't do anything," Salmon Maker said. "Everyone knows that twins have an affinity for salmon," Raven said. "That's true, but I've been dead for many years," Salmon Maker replied. Just then, Shameless the Deer laughed, and then stopped abruptly when his brothers gave him a hard look. Raven grew suspicious, and he went over to Shameless the deer. "What do you find so funny?" Raven asked. "Oh, nothing. I was just remembering something," Shameless the deer replied. "What is that in your teeth?" Raven asked. Raven picked up a scrap of cedar wood, grabbed Shameless the deer by the neck, and scraped up the piece of salmon from his teeth. He looked at it for a moment and said, "This is salmon. Where did you get this?" Shameless the deer tried to lie, but Raven didn't believe him and questioned him more. Finally, the Shameless the deer said, "Your wife gives us salmon to eat." Raven returned to his wife and said, "Thank you for feeding my hungry brothers, my dear." You're welcome," Salmon Maker said meekly. "Now please take pity on your husband, who is also hungry, and make a salmon for me," Raven said. At first she resisted, but Raven was insistent, and finally she relented. Shameless the deer was sent to fetch water, and he brought the cedar box back half full of water. Then Salmon Maker put 2 fingers into the water, and at once there were 2 spring salmon jumping about in the box. Raven was voracious, and with the help of his brothers he roasted them. After they were cooked, Raven took 1 salmon and gave his brothers the other one. Raven had a huge appetite and ate his salmon in no time. Then he helped his brothers eat theirs as well. The next morning Raven was hungry again, and he said to Salmon Maker, "Can you please swim in the river, my dear, so there will be plenty of salmon and our people will never be hungry?" "If I were to swim in the river, there would be so many salmon that the river would dry up," Salmon Maker replied. "Perhaps you could just walk in the river a little bit then." "Certainly that would be all right." Salmon Maker was reluctant, but Raven kept urging her until she agreed. At first Salmon Maker put her foot into the ice water, and nothing happened. "Walk in the water a little ways, my dear," Raven urged. Salmon put her feet into the river, and a couple of salmon jumped in the water nearby. "Just try walking along the shore," Raven said. Salmon Maker walked along the shore with the water up to her ankles. Immediately the river came alive with jumping salmon, and Raven was so happy that he was jumping as well. "There are salmon in the river," Raven said to his brothers. "Go and check the salmon weir." Shameless the deer checked the salmon weir and then came to see Raven. "The trap is full of salmon," Shameless the deer exclaimed. "She did it. Salmon Maker made the salmon come to our river." "Canoe Caulking and Orphan, go and help bring the salmon up from the weir to the big house," Raven said. "Tonight we'll have a feast for the entire village." From that day on, the salmon were abundant in the river, and their traps were full every day. The Myth people had plenty of fresh salmon, and their big houses were full of food. Soon every house in the village was overflowing with smoked or dried salmon. With such plenty, nearby villages envied Raven's prosperity. He became arrogant and overly proud. He began to speak harshly to his brothers and snapped at Salmon Maker. The brothers were angered by Raven's haughty attitude. Salmon Maker told them to ignore Raven's attitude and be happy that they enjoyed such abundance. One day, when Raven left the house, one of the salmon that were hanging in the rafters got caught in his hair. "Darn salmon, stay out of my hair," Raven said as he pulled the dried salmon down from his hair and flung it into the corner. "You are nothing, you only come from the ghosts." Upon hearing Raven's words, Salmon Maker stopped what she was doing and glared at him. "On our first day together, I told you that you must treat me with respect," she said. "I'm angry at these stupid salmon," Raven responded. Salmon Maker grew solemn, then she walked towards the door. "The salmon of my tribe. When I came here, they came also," she explained. "Calm down, my dear," Raven said. "I'm going now, and my tribe will go with me," Salmon Maker replied. Raven stood in front of the door and tried to embrace her, but his arms went through her like she was made of smoke. She had become a ghost once again. Salmon in the rafters of the house became hazy like smoke and then disappeared. In a panic, Raven ran to every house in the village, and all the salmon, which had hung in the rafters and cedar boxes, was gone. There was not one salmon left in the village. Due to Raven's harsh words, the Myth people were poor and hungry once again.